Hello everyone, this is Jones. Today we're going to be doing a review on the M14 rifle. This is going to be from the perspective of myself, someone who has owned this rifle for 5 different years and who's shot in 2 different climates. Those 2 different climates include a temperate, humid environment at sea level to an environment that is high plains, desert, and arid. So everything I say is going to be from the perspective of someone who has shot this in 2 different environments and has 5 years of time behind the weapon system. Not someone who just bought it 2 weeks ago, shot 20 rounds, and they're doing their first video on it. So I know some of our rifles are a little bit different in setup, and mine is no exception. So before I talk about lessons learned over the past couple of years, I'm going to tell you what I have on my rifle. So on the front here, we'll name off my parts that might be different than yours. I have a Smith Enterprises USCG muzzle brake. Works really well. The most notable feature is the Sage EBR ALCS chassis. On top of that, I have a Sage DCSB, or Detachable Cantilever Sight Base. On top of the sight base is a Citron S3 first focal plane MOA reticle, 6-24 power by 50mm objective lens. Underneath the Kydex handguard right here, I have a Sadlac National Match op rod spring guide that's in there, so you can't see it, but it's there. And then, of course, different magazines I've used over the years include USGI magazines, Springfield Armory magazines, and Pro Mag magazines. Those and the muzzle brake will be spoken to in more detail later. Well, really the whole rifle, obviously. But I just wanted to get that out of the way. As far as triggers are concerned, I just still have the Springfield National Match trigger in there. By the way, the rifle is an M1A Springfield National Match rifle in a Sage ALCS chassis, EBR chassis. So I'm going to speak to this weapon as an M14, even though it's an M1A. Just know that those 2 names in this case are going to be interchangeable. So let's get into it. So we're going to start off with a few questions you might have about just what is it like to live with the weapon. More specifically, what's it like to maintain it? What's your favorite way to shoot it, least favorite way to shoot it? And then other things such as different scenarios. So we're going to talk about maintenance first, and I'm going to compare this weapon to an AR-10, something that I'm sure many of us are familiar with, the AR rifle in general, not just the AR-10. So maintenance, out of the box, I suppose you could say, when you first get it, this rifle is obviously completely different from an AR of any sort. So you're going to have to learn how to maintain it and how it works. For instance, it's piston versus direct gas impingement. For range trips, every couple range trips, you want to do a complete disassembly of the weapon, which includes taking off the top handguard of the EBR, removing the M1A, the actual rifle, the receiver out of the chassis, and then doing a degrease and then re-grease of the weapon. Yes, this weapon takes grease and not oil. So that is every couple range trips. But if you just do one range trip, shoot a couple rounds out of it, you might just want to run a barrel snake down the barrel, clean the chamber and a ejection port area over here. But you'll have to do a complete disassembly and reassembly every few range trips. For how to do that, I highly suggest following Tony Benn's video on YouTube. He has a complete disassembly video. He also has a complete lube guide for the M1A. When it comes to anything technical with this type of rifle, he's the guy to go to for sure. In the YouTube community and in the M14 forum community as well. So moving on from that, what scenario is the most enjoyable and least enjoyable to shoot this weapon in? So the most enjoyable for sure is shooting at long range. As you can see, this is definitely optimized for long range shooting. It's really satisfying when you get that steel ping from 300 yards plus out, or if you just see a barrel pop or a jug of water explode. It's really satisfying. Or even something as simple as a shoot and see target on a cardboard backer. That is very, very awesome to see, especially at longer ranges. So that's the most enjoyable. The least enjoyable area to shoot this in is going to be the close-in shoot and move type drills and things like that. It is very fun to do that, don't get me wrong, but it is the least enjoyable on the spectrum here. Why? Is because it's such a heavy rifle. I'm sure you've heard that it's front heavy. The balance point of this rifle is actually forward of the magazine itself. So you can see I'm actually not even holding it right now. It's just sitting in the palm of my hand. the balance point is very far forward, which means your offhand, when you're shooting it, and you're trying to do shooting and moving stuff like that, your offhand is going to be supporting the vast majority of the weight of the rifle. So that is why it's the least enjoyable experience, because it's very cumbersome for your offhand, which in my case is my right hand because I was born wrong-handed. So, do I find myself shooting this weapon more or less than others? This was actually my only center fire rifle for 4 years, and then I went and picked up a PWS Mark 216 this past spring. So now I have 2 center fire rifles. So with that being said, obviously this was my main shooter for 4 years. This past year, when I had 2 .308 caliber rifles now, 2 center fire rifles, this has been evenly split between this being my primary and the 216 being my primary, just because when I'm doing more action type stuff, I will kind of go towards my 216 since it is a lot lighter, and then this is obviously my long range build. With that being said, I have shot both in each other's respective long range and short range scenarios, and optimized areas, I suppose you could say, and I enjoy shooting them both. But the time between this and my other rifles and weapons, for that matter, is pretty evenly split. Another question people have is, how is it like shooting it as a lefty? So I would argue that the controls, which I'll go through right now, are optimized for a lefty as far as manipulating the weapon with one hand. So we're going to pretend that there is nothing in the chamber or the magazine right now. We're going to lock the bolt to the rear as if I just shot my last round. So we're going to pretend my last round shot and I'm going to reload. So I always tuck the stock under my shoulder, under my arm really, next to my rib cage and between my bicep. Grab the magazine with my right hand, put it in the dump pouch, grab a new one, put it in, and then pull back the charging handle with my right hand, the really meaty part of my right hand. So as you can see, I can do everything with my right hand as far as reloading is concerned. That includes manipulating the safety to fire, which it's already on fire right now. So if you're a righty, and correct me if I'm wrong for the righties out there, but when you're shooting an M14, you run dry, you can tuck it like I do, use your left hand to get the magazine out of the weapon, put the new magazine in the weapon, and then you can either put your left hand underneath the weapon or over the top. Obviously with the scope, it's not very practical to put your hand over the top. It's more practical to go under the bottom. Nonetheless, this is a little bit more cumbersome than just doing how I do it as a lefty, which is mag out, mag in, do that, and then do that. So I'd argue the controls are actually better for lefties than righties, but when we're talking about slings, it is the polar opposite. Let me drop the bolt here real fast. Polar opposite. Why is it the polar opposite? Because the bolt I was just operating digs into my stomach, a lefty, whenever I have a 2-point sling on this. A 1-point is out of the question because this gun is just way too heavy to have a 1-point sling and that much weight around your neck. So right now, let's pretend I got a 2-point sling set up, which I don't because it doesn't work for me. Right now the charging handle is digging into my sternum. Of course the weapon's pretty high up. It would be more something like this, and right now it's digging into my belly. So that is very uncomfortable. Now if I were to throw it over my back, which I'm not going to right now because I don't have a sling, but if I were to throw it over my back, that same charging handle, the way a lefty has to have a sling set up, will be digging into my spine. So that is why you do not see a sling. I did experiment with it for about the past year. I had a Magpul 2-point on this. I used it. It was very useful when I was running a chest rig, but if I didn't have a chest rig on, something to buffer the charging handle between my stomach and it, there was, well, it was very uncomfortable. Now, when I was shooting unsupported standing up, it was very useful because it's a third point of contact for the weapon, as well as it gets a little bit of that weight off of your forearm and onto wherever your sling is on, which of course is going to be across your back. So if you're going to just kind of hang with the weapon, hurts. If you're going to use the weapon with your 2-point sling, it's good. But most of the time, I'm not going to run a 2-point sling on this anymore. We're going to move on with a little bit more of a laser beam focus on the EBR chassis itself and a couple questions, things that people might ask me or anyone who owns this when they first get it. So initially, is it hard to install? No. You might need a couple special tools you might not already own, specifically castle nut pliers that are for the M14. You can't use the same castle nut wrench that's used for AR buffer tubes. It's got to be these guys right here. Additionally, I'd highly suggest getting a torque screwdriver, torque wrench, or something of that nature. It goes from 0 to 65 inch-pounds because you'll need it to torque down all the different screws that come along with owning an EBR. Additionally, you'll need some blue Loctite or rubber mallet and a couple other things that I can't think of right now. So, starting from the front, when you first install the EBR chassis, just really quick, castle nut pliers, you need those to take off the flash suppressor or muzzle brake depending on what you have. You'll need actually a socket set, can't remember the measurement, to remove your gas cylinder because the EBR chassis comes with a new op rod guide. And you need to remove everything here to get the old op rod guide off and the new op rod guide on. Once you get that on, it's kind of smooth sailing. After, of course, you shim the gas cylinder itself. So you will probably want to purchase some extra shims along with your EBR chassis. So those are the few nuances that come along with doing this. Additionally, Tony Bennett has videos on YouTube that go over precisely how to shim your gas cylinder. So I would highly suggest watching that if you actually need to install this. But we'll move on. Another thing that comes with the EBR chassis is a barrel whip screw. So right here in the front of the EBR chassis, you have on the right hand side a really tiny Allen wrench screw, which is a set screw. On the top, you might be able to see it from here, you have another Allen wrench screw that touches the barrel itself. So you might be asking yourself, why do I want to put screws on the barrel? That sounds like a dumb idea. So it's to control something called barrel whip and harmonics. So if you've ever played with a tuning fork and you kind of like hit it with a metal thing and seen the subtle vibrations, the same concept is occurring in the barrel every time you shoot. They're very subtle vibrations that we might not be able to see or experience, but they're happening nonetheless. So the barrel whip screw, what it does is it dampens the harmonics of the barrel long enough for the projectile to exit the barrel without the harmonics affecting the projectile's accuracy too much, relative to if you just didn't have a barrel whip screw at all. So that's what this does. There's a different kind of opinion on everyone for how to install the barrel whip screw. However, I have come to a conclusion based off two different manuals as well as an armorer, an Army armorer for M14 EBRs. He states that they have done a couple different slow motion tests, specifically 60,000 frames per second, and this is taken from the M14 forum from this individual. He's done studies without the barrel whip screw, with the barrel whip screw installed to where it's just touching the barrel, and then the whip screw installed to where it's torqued down on the barrel. And he has said that all the studies, all the time he spent doing this, by far the best results with the whip screw are going to come from getting it to where it's just barely touching the barrel. That way it dampens the harmonics as I've already described without throwing the barrel in one direction or the other, assuming he had it torqued down too much or not even there in the first place. He also states that you'll see the best effects with the whip screw out of a 22-inch barrel relative to an 18-inch barrel. But that is the way that Sage suggests you install it. That Army Technical Manual, where's the number at? It's on my screen somewhere. Army Technical Manual 9 TAC 1005, TAC 223, TAC 10, change 1, current as of January 2009. So all those different sources, 3 different sources, say the same thing for how to install a whip screw. The reason I spent like the past 2 minutes on this specific topic is that is one of the biggest factors for improving your accuracy with the EBR chassis is the whip screw and how you install your sight base. But I really wanted to drive that point home and note all those sources for you guys. So moving on, the fit of the action. I know some guys have had issues with the fit of the action in their EBR chassis and the trigger guard, or rather the trigger guard group itself. Thankfully, with my Springfield Armory national match, I did not have any of those issues. It was never tight for me. The receiver was not tight. The trigger group was not tight at all. Never had any action lockups, so I really can't comment to that. But if you're a potential buyer watching this, that is something to take into account. It's also something that can be fixed if you take it to a gunsmith or you already have that know-how. It can be fixed for sure. Additionally, the EBR is obviously set up for longer range and to have optics on it. There's a bunch of different scope mounting options. I have the Sage detachable cantilever sight base on here, but that's not to say that you can't use iron sights. You can use iron sights. Your cheek riser can go down low enough to where you can use your iron sights and get a proper cheek weld. In fact, the way I have a cheek weld when I use iron sights on this weapon, because I do it from time to time, I actually can't have this all the way down low. So if you were concerned if the cheek riser goes not low enough for iron sights, that shouldn't be a concern, because you can definitely use irons with this. So let's move on to parts reliability of the weapon. We're going to talk about two things that have come up in the past 5 years of ownership. And it's only two things, but they're very serious, I would argue. The first one is the extractor. While shooting standing unsupported one day, thankfully it was on the last round of that magazine, so the bolt automatically locked to the rear and didn't try to feed another round. The extractor broke, and it actually shot straight up and then landed on top of the weapon while I was still following through with my shot. And it landed on top of the weapon, so I was able to ID immediately that my extractor had just broken into two on the last shot of that magazine. Additionally, something I identified the last time I did a complete disassembly of this rifle about 2 weeks ago is that the sear has a crack on the right side of it, and it is where the sear connects to the trigger itself, that little pinhole. So it is a hairline crack, but a crack nonetheless, and something that is very serious, and I can't shoot this weapon until I fix it, which I haven't fixed it yet. But those are two things that are original manufacturer parts from Springfield Armory that I can't make this video without noting those two issues, which is the extractor broke while shooting, and the sear has a hairline fracture on the pinhole itself. Moving on, additionally, parts reliability. Over time, we're going to talk about rust. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to talk about where I've seen rust. So starting with magazines, right here I have a Springfield Armory magazine and a USGI magazine. In the gun is a Pro Mag magazine. So these two I have absolutely had no issues as far as proper seating, the bolt locking to the rear, and proper feeding and surface rest. Absolutely zero issues. That should foreshadow the issues that I have had with Pro Mag magazines. So as you can see right now, the Pro Mag magazines fit perfectly. You can't tell from this video, but they will lock open the bolt on the last shot and feed properly. That is not after I had to modify them. So I bought, I think, 3 Pro Mag magazines, and every single one of them, this little tab on the back where the mag catch paddle locks into was about 1/8 inch too long. So every magazine, I dremeled it down until it's seated properly. When it's seated properly, I figured out that on the last shot, the follower did not go far enough up into the receiver to make contact with the bolt catch, which means it didn't lock open on the last shot. So to fix that issue, I took out the follower, identified that there was a couple pieces of metal that were too high. In the stamping process, it wasn't like metal burrs or anything. The stamping is probably not the best from Pro Mag. So I had to hit that down with a hammer and pin until I got it just right. And now all my Pro Mag mags work, seat, feed, lock the bolt open perfectly every time. The issue I have had with these more recently is surface rust occurred on them, which is very unusual. It doesn't occur on the GI mags or the Springfield Armory mags, but it does on all my Pro Mag mags. So if there was anything else that would make these mags worse, it would be the surface rust. So with that in mind, although I got them to work, it speaks to the huge lack of quality from Pro Mag, specifically for this batch of magazines that I got from them. As far as accuracy is concerned, I would define accuracy as 1.5 MOA or better. This is in accordance with the Army manual, the technical manual that I have referenced a couple times already throughout the video. So that is the standard that I'm going to apply to this rifle. Overall, throughout the life, I've gotten about a 1.24 MOA consistent group. I have gotten 1 MOA groups, but nowhere near as consistent as 1.24. Different ammo types I've shot include your XM80C, so your NATO 147 grain, 149 grain military surplus, primarily because it's really cheap and I like to shoot this as much as I can. The other types of ammo include FGMM or Federal Gold Medal Match. I've shot Remington AccuTip, Remington Premier Match, and a couple other buys from the range counter of 168 grain. So all the 168 grains for the most part perform the same, honestly. So the best results are going to be with your 168. For fun, I'll go with the 147 NATO Surplus or the XM80C. It's worth noting that I have never shot this rifle from a lead sled. So I have never eliminated the human variable from the accuracy. With that being said, 5 years of shooting and still getting that same group about, I would say that you're not going to shave off more than a fraction of an inch to that group. So I think this is performing as best as it can. But of course, we would all like to get our rifles to be as accurate as they possibly can. As far as holding a zero and maintaining a zero, for the DCSB, I've never had an issue. Assuming you maintain the same torque value for the DCSB as you had it on when you took it off and put it back on again, you're not going to shift point of impact. Of course, if you disassemble the rifle or the temperatures change by 30 degrees or more or something like that, you will definitely have a shift in point of impact, which of course would require you to shift zero. But for maintaining a zero, it maintains a zero just as well as any other rifle that I own. Oh shit. Fuck yes. I also have my flash hider kind of portion in this accuracy part of the video. So flash hider versus muzzle brake versus no muzzle device whatsoever. I have shot all three of those in the same day with the same ammo at the same place, just to see if there was any shift in accuracy. Not point of impact, because of course there would be a shift of point of impact with no muzzle device versus muzzle devices. So what I did that day was I took my National Match flash suppressor, my USCG muzzle brake, and then I also shot with no muzzle device whatsoever on the weapon. There was a shift in point of impact for no muzzle device, but when I had the flash suppressor and the muzzle brake, which you see here, those had the same point of impact, so no shift. Eventually what I had determined that day was that, one, this muzzle brake it's like shooting night and day compared to flash suppressor versus muzzle brake. The recoil is largely tamed by this. I can't overstate how good this muzzle brake is as far as taming the recoil. It's insane. I would imagine that, although I've never tried it, bracketing your shots at long range is possible with this muzzle brake versus a flash suppressor. The other variable I eliminated was that the flash suppressor does not have an does not have an impact on your accuracy. Although point of impact, of course, is going to shift. That's just to be expected. So those are two different variables I eliminated that day. So we'll move on to the end of the video. We have pros and cons. We'll start off with cons and end on a good note with the pros, and then what I see for the future of this rifle, my rifle. For the cons overall, the accuracy is 1.25 MOA on average for this rifle. I really like getting those tight groups. I know that 1.24 is good for this rifle. I'd always like to get more accurate, just like anyone else with their weapon. So that, I would call it a con. Weight is one of the cons. A lot of the weight is focused on the forearm of the weapon. There's not really too much going on here as far as weight is concerned. So over time, it does become cumbersome shooting unsupported. It's not to say that you can't do it, it's just that you will get tired quicker with this, whereas if you're shooting just a carbine of some sort, you'd be able to shoot longer unsupported with that carbine. But that just comes with having a whole bunch of long barrel, heavy barrel, big sight, and a big chassis on your weapon. So that is a con, nonetheless. I would also say expensive accessories and triggers. Although there are many people who make accessories for the M1A and the M14 rifles, the pricing is it's pretty expensive, I would say. There's just so much competition in the AR community, in the AR accessories market, that the prices almost they are forced to be lower to be competitive. But there are a lot of manufacturers in the M1A community, but it's not as competitive as the AR. So I really wish that there's more competition as far as pricing is concerned, and that has to be a con for sure. That everything is just so darn expensive for this weapon. The open design is also another con. So I don't know if you guys watched Forgotten Weapons. They did a mud test one day on AR versus M14 in the mud. Long story short, the M14 in the mud shot the shot that was already in the chamber, and then the action seized up because the mud got in. In the EBR chassis, you have, let's see, well, rather the M14 itself, you have a very open design right near the rear peep sight. There's a huge opening right where it is on the M1 Garand, and that allows large particles of anything that fits will get in there and screw up your action. Now, if sand gets in there, it's not going to stop the action from functioning properly. It'll be gritty for sure, but it will not stop the action from functioning. You get mud, you get something thick and viscous in there, it will definitely prevent this weapon from firing at all. So that is a huge con. It's kind of comedic watching the Forgotten Weapons mud test on that. I'd suggest you go ahead and watch it. It's a good watch. Another con, the last con before I move on to the pros, so many darn screws. There's about 8 different screws, actually 10 different screws for this weapon. I won't name them off, but there's about 10. And there's just so many screws you have to deal with, different torque specs for each of them. And then you have to keep track of them. You're disassembling your weapon, whereas it's really easy on an AR to keep captive pins in place, and that's really the only thing you have to worry about is your captive pins, and even then those won't roll away from you. So all the Loctite, all the torque specs that go in with the screws in the EBR chassis is a huge con in my opinion. So we'll move on to the pros now that I'm done complaining about this. Pros, accuracy is 1.24 MOA. Like I said, for some people that's great. For some people like me who always want to get that one whole group, it's not great. But in this case, it's a pro for probably most other people. It looks really cool. That was the first thing that got me into this rifle, is I really like the look of it. That's really the first thing I tell people buying a new firearm. Does it look good to you? Cool, then go ahead and buy it. I also really love the history. There's a little bit of political stuff as far as when the FAL went up against the M14 for the next service rifle. Yeah, that aside, I really enjoy the history and reading new things about the rifle and how it came to be. Additionally, very pleasant shooter. It's heavy, yes, and the muzzle brake helps with the recoil, as does the weight that I just talked about. So although the weight is it's a con, it's also a pro in that it keeps the weapon pretty horizontal when you're shooting, which allows for rapid follow-up shots if you're trying to bracket shots on target or something like that. Additionally, I've already talked about the great history. There's a plethora of other accessories. Like I said, that is a con in that they are expensive, but nonetheless, there are a lot of accessories for this weapon as far as different chassis. If you don't like the EBR chassis, there's plenty of other companies that make chassis and that are reputable companies. Although this rifle is heavy, the ergonomics are great. Really like the Codex handguard, which gives you excellent grip on the weapon, as you can tell. I really enjoy the finger detents in the EBR LCS chassis here. I'm usually not a fan of detents, but these kind of work perfectly. The grip angle also isn't too harsh, so it's really nice to shoot with your elbows tucked, or if you're on the ground shooting, it's ergonomic either way. The customizable cheek riser is absolutely wonderful because everyone's got different size faces and stuff, and your scopes are different. So all the contact points on the weapon for handling it are just extremely ergonomic, even though it's heavy. So that's essentially all the cons. Moving on to what I'm going to do in the future, and that'll wrap up the video, is in the future I am going to try to do an XM21 barrel with XM21 receiver with a 19-inch medium weight national match barrel from Bullet Defense. The reason I want to go with that receiver is because it has milled Picatinny rails in it, which eliminates not only the weight of your DCSB, your detachable cantilever sight base, but also eliminates the variable of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 screws that you have to torque down. If any one of those comes loose, it can throw off your accuracy enough to where your point of impact shifts and you got to re-zero your rifle. So that is the reason I'm going to go with a receiver that has Picatinny rails milled into it to eliminate the weight and eliminate that accuracy variable. Additionally, it's affordable for what it is, and I really just want to tell you guys about that because it's not too many people know about the Bullet Defense XM21 receiver who are new to this community anyways. So if you guys have any questions or anything you want to discuss in the comment section, go right ahead. Thank you for watching, and then if you have any other additional questions that I can't answer, the M14 forums are a really helpful place to go and hang out. So thank you all for watching.